Well, today I would like for us to talk about a subject that might not be the most popular, at least not in practice. And it's not the most entertaining or the most fun. Most people don't research this subject on their smartphones during their breaks or watch movies about it while they're relaxing on the weekend at home. It doesn't lend itself well to tickling the ears or making one feel good about themselves. And that subject is personal responsibility. Now, this is something that's written in a Wikipedia article about personal responsibility. It says personal responsibility or individual responsibility is the idea that human beings choose, instigate, or otherwise cause their own actions. A corollary idea is that because we cause our actions, we can be held liably. We can be held morally accountable or legally liable. Personal responsibility can be contrasted to the idea that human actions are caused by conditions beyond the agent's control. So, personal responsibility is the idea that we choose, instigate, or otherwise cause our own actions, and that our actions are not caused by conditions that are beyond our control. Now, I'm sure you've heard the statement, "The devil made me do it." Or in a workplace, an employee might respond to a question asking what they can do to improve the customer's impression of the employee's service by saying the computers need to be updated. And that example, by the way, is from firsthand real life experience. When we fall short, where do we place the blame? I was raised badly. So-and-so pushed my buttons, and so on. Blaming others for our actions or lack of actions is something that we've probably all done. And in society, it's common practice. But what are the effects of this passing of blame? Well, first of all, if our actions are the fault of something outside of ourselves, then unless we change those external factors, we are powerless to change ourselves. And let's face it, we frequently cannot change things on the outside. We generally cannot single-handedly change society, which means changing the vast majority of individuals, because society is individuals. And we often cannot change the single individual in an effort to change ourselves. Can we? Well, here's a slightly different example. How are you today? Well, I'm at work, so, but I'll be doing much better at quitting time. Now, perhaps your experience in the workforce has been incredibly unusual, and your fellow employees are happy to be there doing what they're doing. But sadly, that's a rare exception rather than the rule. I'm here because I have to be here, and thus they're not happy about it. Their need to earn a living is something that is probably out of their control. So by blaming their own inner actions on that external reality, they become powerless to change their attitude and thus their experience of life in that moment. And thus their experience is negative. And that's why today's topic is so important. For taking personal responsibility for your inner state is the only way that you can stop being controlled. In the popular state of mind, we are the slaves of other people and events. We are imprisoned by bars that are generally unyielding to our will, and thus they are impossible for us to escape. But today, I'd like for us to consider, for just a few moments, the insanity of that perspective as we consider how we can finally set ourselves free. I'd like to read 3 points that are taken from an article written by Steve Bronkhorst titled 12 Reflections on Personal Responsibility. And the link to his article is in today's note card. Quote, personal responsibility begins from the inside and moves outward. We must begin by taking responsibility for our thoughts, choices, and reactions. Then we can be responsible for the circumstances we create in our world. When you think something or someone else is responsible for your problems and their solutions, that exact thought is the first problem to solve. A great philosophy of responsibility. When things are working, I am responsible. When they need fixing, I am responsible. So first, he suggests that personal responsibility begins with taking responsibility for our thoughts, our choices, and our reactions, and that this inner shift will result in what we say and do. In Matthew 23:26, Jesus says that we should clean the inside, and then the outside will be clean also. In other words, all of our words and outer actions come from the inside. So, trying to change what we do and say is an exercise in futility and is doomed to fail. Instead, we should change the inside, and then the rest will change automatically as a direct result. Does that make sense? And we can go even closer to the source than that. After all, dealing with our thoughts from the level of our thoughts is a daunting task, to say the least. And here's what I mean by that. Our thoughts, or more accurately, our mind's thoughts, hold such power over us only because our sense of identity is in the producer of those thoughts. We call them our thoughts, as though we are directly producing that endless prattle of words over which we seem to have no control. But does that really make sense? After all, if we did produce all of our thoughts, then we would have complete control over them, wouldn't we? Here's an example to help make that more clear. Imagine that you have an involuntary twitch in your arm. It keeps jerking and you have no control over it. Now imagine that you reach for a glass and your arm jerks and knocks the glass onto the floor, where it promptly shatters into hundreds of pieces. Would you think that you are creating that twitch, or that the jerking is being caused by something outside of who and what you are? In the same way, the vast majority of the thoughts that go through your head are not created by you, any more than the jerking movements of your arm. Instead, it is the human mind that runs on its programming and generates the constant babble that goes on in your head. You are not your mind. And if you just remember that, it will change your life. Now imagine with me for a moment that you're the caretaker of a mentally disturbed person. You're always together, and that person constantly mumbles, often saying things that are inappropriate or out of touch with reality. I don't like that person, he says, so the only right thing to do is start yelling at them. But do you do what he says? Or do you realize that he is not mentally stable, and he is certainly not you, and you are not him, and you just let his words pass by? On the other hand, if you somehow forgot that you are not him, and as a result, you got lost in his words and started taking them as seriously as he does, you just might start yelling at the person he said he didn't like. Well, that's exactly what we tend to do. We forget that we are not our mind, and our mind is not us. And as a result, we get lost in its words, and we start taking our thoughts seriously. We even take its thoughts as settled fact. Now, that might be in the form of religious doctrines, beliefs about a person's motivations, or negative attitudes about things that we cannot control, such as having to work for a living or the weather. But when we step back and realize that we are not the mind, and we are not the mind-made person who has a history, is a parent, a spouse, or a victim, and who has a name, an age, and is an ego, then we can stop being controlled by that mind. We can stop believing everything it says and taking everything it says so seriously. We can stop letting our perspectives, our attitudes, our words, and our actions be dictated by its volition. It is a place of silence, a place of stillness, a place of unshakable peace. Until now, the mind has probably steered your life, your actions, your attitudes, your reactions, your interactions, your relationships, and your entire perception of reality and of life. But today, in this present moment, you can step back, accept what is, and be free. By step back, I mean that you stop identifying with the mind and all the things that it generates. By accept what is, I mean that you do not fight against the mind, its thoughts, and what is going on around you, your physical feelings, the sounds, the sights. They are what they are, and you allow them to be without placing labels or judgments on them. And by be free, I mean that you are no longer controlled by the self-centered, confused, egotistical, prideful, victimized, mistreated, relatively infantile mind and its myriad thoughts and ideas. And as a result, the mind begins to change automatically, just like Jesus' imagery of the outside of the cup becoming clean. Now, the inside of your cup is the breath of God you are. That's the center, even before the inside of the cup, is the breath of God that you are. Now, you can feel this breath as a tangible experience, the feeling of energy in your hands, your arms, and your whole body. That is the center of the cup. And around that center is the rest of the cup. Now, the mind is like the inside of the cup and includes the mind's thoughts, reactions, attitudes, and the Bob or Lisa or Jennifer or Larry or fill in your name here that you have always thought you are. And the outside of the cup is your words and your actions, the things that everybody else hears and sees. Do you want the inside to be clean so the outside can be clean as well? If you are identified with the inside of the cup, the mind and the mind-made person, then the task of cleaning is daunting and it's ultimately impossible. But if you step back and you see those things as separate, as temporary, and as just the way they are, and you let them be that way, then the presence you are and the presence of God within you will be free to change the inside of the cup from glory to glory into His perfect image. After all, if you're identified with the mind and the person it has created, you're going to get caught up in the mind's fighting change. After all, change, especially self-change, is frightening to the mind. If the person that thinks you are needs to have parts of it dissolved, that feels like a threat. And the dissolution feels like death. But if you are dwelling in presence and you're simply observing the mind and its person, then any amount of change that needs to take place is okay. In fact, if that person needed to be completely rewritten as someone else entirely, that would be okay as well. The mind blames forces outside of itself for its own attitudes, experiences, thoughts, words, and actions. But the presence you are takes personal responsibility. Or put another way, without force or willpower or struggling and striving, the presence you are effortlessly changes everything around it. As you rest in that presence, as you rest in the presence of God, and as you and He observe the changes taking place without being attached to the outcome. For while the outcome, the future, is a mere idea held by the mind, the eternal present moment is where you dwell with the Spirit of God, and it is perfect, flawless, and complete. So, let us today step into that place of presence right now, and let us make that presence our everlasting home. Well, this altar is open, and I'd like to invite you to get out of your seat right now and make your way to the front, and we're just going to spend some time letting whatever God spoke to you today sink in, and also in a time of worship and ministry. And if you'd like somebody to talk with you or pray with you, you're invited to either instant message one of us if you're inside of Second Life right now, or you can go to the website at almcyberchurch.org and click the prayer room or these pastors' offices link, and you can contact us that way. Whenever you need to go, you are officially dismissed, and if you can stay until after this time at the altar, you're invited to make your way up the steps to your left when you're done here, and we're just going to meet there in a little bit and hang out in fellowship. But for now, come and let us surrender to God as we, with Him, take personal responsibility. Lord God, we thank you for speaking to us today. We thank you for calling us into this place so that you can challenge us, so that you can open our eyes, and so that we can dwell and walk more closely with you. And ask that nothing you've said today would be stolen away, but it would take deep root in fertile soil, and it would grow into trees of righteousness, the planting and making of the Lord. We ask these things in Jesus' beautiful name.